They called her Empty Eyes. They turned her into a monster. They took her family, her name, and her future. But they made one fatal mistake. They let her live. Now no longer a victim, Alex Quinlan is a hunter, and she won't stop until the one who destroyed her life pays the price. I'm Clyde. Follow her journey of vengeance on the Best Mystery Book Podcast.
Chapter 25. Washington, D.C. Monday, March 6, 2023, 8:36 p.m. Her condo sat on the top floor of a 5-story building that overlooked the Potomac. Never a city girl until her time in Cambridge, which by no stretch of the imagination could be considered a big city, but was still a stark contrast to tiny McIntosh, Virginia. Alex could no longer imagine herself in a small town. She had grown up in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the closest city was a 2-hour drive. But today, the hustle and bustle of city life had grown on her. Perhaps the appeal was the dual sensation of feeling invisible while never being alone. Despite that, Donna and Garrett's second home, where Alex had escaped to during her trial and where she stayed after her failed attempt at college, was hidden in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Alex constantly feared being recognized when she was there. In the months following her return from Cambridge, Alex sensed that she stood out in the small town, with its empty streets and laid-back establishments. The relentless worry of being recognized as the empty-eyed girl who had once been accused of killing her family was yet another scar that slashed through her disfigured psyche, this one delivered by Drew Estes and Laverne Parker. Enough years had passed now, however, for the uneasiness to fade. She purchased her Georgetown condo when she was 23, and now felt like just another face in the crowd. No one gave her a second glance, and she felt at home on the crowded streets of Washington, D.C. Some would count this as progress and maturity, a young woman making her way in the world. Others would count it as overcoming a difficult past that included a horrendous trauma and making the most of a terrible situation. But Alex knew the truth. Her ability to cope with her past came from neatly organizing her life into 3 categories. Her anonymous self, Alex Armstrong, the spiked-hair rebel who moved invisibly through the world, worked as an investigator for Lancaster and Jordan, and lived a mostly normal existence. Her old self, Alexandra Quinlan, who the world knew only as the empty-eyed girl whose family had been killed. And her true self, some combination of those other personas, but with some additional ingredient mixed in. Although not easily defined, that ingredient kept Alex hungry for answers to what had happened to her family, and confident that no matter how much time passed, she would eventually find the truth. The circle of people who knew each of her personalities was small. It included Donna and Garrett Lancaster, as well as a handful of attorneys at Lancaster and Jordan who had worked her case. Then there were her friends from juvie, who knew just about everything since they met Allegheny. And finally, there was her psychiatrist, who had, over the years of weekly sessions, pulled every detail of Alex's past out of her subconscious. Dr. Morales likely knew Alex better than she knew herself. Although she was hesitant at first, the weekly sessions allowed Alex to understand what made up her DNA. Years of therapy had provided Alex with the tools needed to understand that her decade-long journey had been skewed from the beginning. There were others, she knew, who suffered similar loss or endured comparable tragedy, but they had likely gone through the grieving process in a more structured and traditional manner. Alex's journey had been wrong-footed from the start. She had been granted no time to properly mourn the loss of her family, or even process their deaths. She'd gone from the trauma of that night to a ruthless juvenile detention center where the time needed to grieve was instead spent trying to survive and fend off the truly vile kids she was locked up with. After Donna and Garrett had secured her release, the safeguards put in place to avoid the media had overshadowed the work Alex needed to do to process what had happened that fateful night. Then came the defamation case against the state of Virginia. The first time Alex spoke about the night her family was killed had been on the witness stand, with a packed courtroom staring at her while television cameras recorded her every word. Her journey had indeed been skewed, and her therapist continued to point out that correcting her trajectory through life was more important than arriving at some imagined utopia in the end. So it was not unreasonable, or even unexpected, that 10 years after her family was killed, Alex's sleeping hours continued to transport her back to the moment the first gunshot woke her. Over the years, the dreams had become vivid to the point of lucidity. On rare nights, Alex became fully conscious while dreaming, aware that what was happening was taking place within a dream state. She grew courageous during those lucid dreams and would sneak from behind the grandfather clock and slowly creep toward her parents' bedroom. But reality and fiction would collide then. Two worlds that overlapped but could never fully merge, and stop her at the foot of her parents' door frame. Occasionally, she would try to fool her mind during those dreams, telling herself that she planned only to walk to her parents' doorway and listen. Instead, though, she'd burst through the door, hoping to see what her mind could only imagine. Hoping to see her brother standing in their parents' bedroom, alive and waiting for her to save him. Hoping, too, to see the person holding the shotgun. To finally put a face to the figure she knew only as the shadow she'd seen from behind the grandfather clock. But as soon as she charged through the doorway in her dreams, she'd wake with a startle. It was after one of those dreams, in her small Cambridge flat, that she started the construction of her board. When she woke, she wrote down every detail she could remember on a note card and pegged it to her board. Young and motivated people Alex had read in a self-help book created similar collections called vision boards. Those colleges contained people's life goals and things they hoped to accomplish in their careers. Those boards included promotions in cars and houses. Alex's board contained evidence. Her board contained everything she had ever remembered, imagined or real, about the night her family was killed. Evidence that had ever been collected or assigned to the case. What started as a bulletin board that hung on the kitchen wall of her Cambridge flat had grown years later to a 6-foot by 8-foot standing easel that took up a good portion of her dining room. Although Alex had Drew Estes and Laverne Parker to blame for the constant habit of looking over her shoulder, they also were responsible for providing the biggest clue on her board. Years earlier, with help from Leo the Brit, Drew Estes was incentivized to provide the name of the man who had opened the numbered bank account her parents had presided over, the statements to which Alex found hidden in an abandoned box in her attic. That man was Roland Glazer. Over the years, Alex had meticulously researched the man to the point of obsession. The research wasn't difficult. Roland Glazer had been all over the news, an American businessman convicted of sex trafficking of teenage girls. Glazer died in jail while awaiting trial in 2012, a couple of months before Alex's family was killed. Connected to the who's who of the business, entertainment, political, and tech worlds, the news articles Alex had read, many of which were now pinned to her board, revealed that Roland Glazer owned an island off the coast of Miami, where he routinely held parties for the rich and famous. It was on this island, and at those parties, where teenage girls were passed around to the wealthy businessmen, celebrities, and tech moguls who attended. As the feds moved in and rumors of sex trafficking charges leaked, 3 of those women went missing. The women were longtime employees of Glazer's and resided on his private island. It was suspected that the women might have been able to provide key details about who had attended the clandestine parties and specifics about the girls Glazer shuttled to and from the island. Speculation was high that Glazer had something to do with their disappearance. Images of the 3 women were included in the new articles and posted on websites. It was then, while researching Roland Glazer, that Alex had made the most substantial discovery in her quest to find answers to why her family was killed. The 3 women who had been linked to Glazer were the same women in the photos found on her parents' bed the night they were killed. The exposés and news articles Alex had read suggested that Roland Glazer had been a ticking time bomb that would have blown to bits some major careers and uncovered a clandestine underworld had his story gone mainstream, and his case made it to trial. Instead, Glazer hanged himself in his jail cell the night before his trial was to start. What on earth her parents had to do with this man was the biggest unknown Alex had come across in her years of searching for the truth. A red thumbtack pinned Roland Glazer's photo to the middle of the board. Surrounding Glazer's image and the photos of the women found on her parents' bed were dozens of index cards and news articles. An image of the lone fingerprint sequestered from her bedroom window occupied its own section on the right side of the board. As big a mystery today as it was from the start. As Alex examined the board, she was unsure if she was any closer to finding the truth now than she had been when she created her board years earlier. Her lack of progress was an internal dialogue Alex constantly worked to mute. Perhaps her shrink was correct. It's not the destination, but the journey. Chapter 26. Washington, D.C., Monday, March 6, 2023, 8:36 p.m. The freestanding easel that was her evidence board resided in the area of her condo where a dining table and chairs should be, and was visible to Alex every day. When she had company, which was infrequent, she pulled an accordion-style room divider in front of the board to hide it from view. Her doorbell rang and pulled Alex's attention away from the board. She walked to the intercom by the front door and pressed the button. "Hello?" "Hey Alex, it's me," Garrett said. "Can I come up? I've got to talk to you about some office business." "Sure." Alex pressed the button to unlock the building's front door. She walked back to the board and pulled the accordion divider in front of it. The elevator chimed just as Alex opened her front door. Garrett emerged at the end of the hallway a moment later. "Want a beer or something?" Alex asked after Garrett walked into her condo. "Sure," Garrett said. Alex retrieved a bottle of Sam Adams from the fridge and handed it to him. "So what's the house call about? Something that couldn't wait until morning?" "It probably could have," Garrett said, taking a sip of the beer. "But I didn't want to have this conversation at the office." Garrett walked over to the window and looked out at the Potomac. "I had an interesting development with the Byron Zell case." Alex swallowed hard and did her best to sound indifferent. "Oh yeah, I'm still working on that case. He's been a hard nut to crack. I couldn't find much online. The financial records he handed over looked clean. That's as far as I've gone." Garrett was still facing the window, and he didn't immediately respond, leaving her words to hang in the air like a stale odor. "So what's going on?" Alex finally asked. "Byron Zell sent me an email. It contained all his financial records." "Really? He already provided them, I thought. Isn't that what you gave me to dig through?" "Yeah," Garrett said, turning from the window, which was why I was surprised when he sent the documents a second time. "Yeah, that's weird." Alex paused. "Did they match what he already gave us?" "Word for word." Well, I guess you have your answer then. Byron Zell sounds legit. Unless you... What? Don't think the files he sent are authentic." "No, they're the real deal," Garrett said, walking from the window and into the kitchen, where Alex stood. But a different problem surfaced with the email. There was something else in the documents Byron Zell sent me. "Something else?" This time Alex's tone was sincere. She had only attached financial documents to the email, so the something else was news to her. "One of the files contained some disturbing child pornography." "What?" "Awful stuff," Garrett said, ignoring Alex's surprise. "So I found myself in a difficult spot. I'm legally required to keep the financial documents confidential, since they pertain directly to my client and the case he's hired me for. Even if something nefarious had been in them, attorney-client privilege would prevent me from reporting it, but the child pornography was something else. I had no choice but to alert the police. Had I not, I could be considered liable in the crime. The authorities are looking into the situation now. I'm sure they'll have a team of forensic computer pros go over every detail of Zell's computer." "Shit," Alex said to herself. "Good," Garrett said. "You see my concern. So we can stop the little dance we're doing. I need to ask a question, and I need you to tell me the truth. No bullshit." Alex nodded. "Is there any way? Anyway, Alex, the email that came from Zell's computer can be linked back to Lancaster and Jordan." Alex knew enough not to blurt out her answer. She knew that Garrett was asking a question that needed careful contemplation, so she gave it. She replayed in her mind the night she'd broken into Zell's apartment. She went through every detail, step by step, and could think of no mistakes she made. "No," she finally answered. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Alex knew that Garrett had placed a great deal of trust in her over the years, since hiring her as a legal investigator. She walked a fine line between trying to impress him with the information she uncovered for the firm and being careful never to put him in harm's way. "I promise," Alex said. "There's no way any of it can come back to us. It's why the documents came to you in an email from him. It's untraceable except back to Zell." She watched Garrett nod his head and take a sip of beer. "And I didn't know anything about the child porn stuff. I was just making sure the financials he provided to the firm matched his private files." Garrett nodded again. "Okay, are you hungry? I'll take you to dinner." Alex forced a smile. "Starving," she said before walking into her bedroom to change. That was how she and Garrett operated. There was never a lot of back and forth. Information was exchanged. They both believed the other was telling the truth. The discussion was settled, and they moved on. Alex emerged from her bedroom a few minutes later to find Garrett standing in front of her board. He had moved the accordion divider to the side, and now analyzed the photos and notes and newspaper articles pinned to the board. Alex cleared her throat. "Are you ready?" Garrett didn't move from the board. He spoke with his back to her. "I thought you'd given up on this." "Yeah, well, I figured out that I couldn't, so I got back into it." Garrett finally turned around. "You okay?" "I'm fine." A long pause followed. "It's not good for you, Alex. To keep everything so fresh in your mind, it's unhealthy. Isn't that what the psychiatrist tells you?" Garrett knew about Alex's therapy sessions. The psychiatric therapy was not court-ordered, but was highly recommended by the judge who'd awarded Alex the $8 million verdict. Part of the compensation awarded was earmarked for therapy, and she was encouraged to participate in it. "Dr. Morales and I don't agree on everything. Sometimes it's good to let go of the past," Garrett said. "Not everything, not the good stuff, but some of it. Well, the bad stuff is just part of me. I've tried to let it go, but that doesn't work for me. Looking, not necessarily finding anything, but looking, it makes me feel like I'm not forgetting about them. And since I don't want to forget about them, I'll never stop looking." There was another long pause. "Are we going to dinner?" Alex asked. Garrett nodded. "Yeah. Pizza?" Chapter 27. Washington, D.C., Monday, April 10th, 2023, 7:48 p.m. At 56 years old, Annette Packard maintained her athletic build through a combination of Pilates and swimming. Pilates was new to middle age. Swimming was in her blood. As a teenager, she had dreams of and a legitimate shot at swimming for the U.S. Olympic team. But a labrum tear stole half a second from her 400-meter butterfly, and with that fraction went her swimming career. Despite an early retirement from competitive swimming, and like many who grew up in the sport, she never left the water. It helped that the J. Edgar Hoover Building housed an Olympic-sized pool. Home to FBI headquarters, the Hoover Building was dubbed the ugliest building in Washington, and the pool paid homage to the building's moniker. Located on underground level 2, the aquatic center was a dilapidated mess of missing tiles and badly patched concrete. The voluminous space was without windows or natural light, and was shadowed by poorly functioning overhead fluorescents in perpetual need of replacement. But when Annette was working late, as she was this night, The pool's 24-hour access came in handy. She was a member at a private health club in the suburbs, but the pool hours ended at 7:00 p.m., and her current project rarely allowed her freedom at that time of night. She walked from the showers in the staging area between the women's locker room and the pool, happy to see only one of the 6 lanes occupied. An older gentleman was kicking his way through the water in some hybrid of breaststroke and doggy pat. His name was Len Palmer, an 80-year-old retired special agent who was recovering from hip replacement. Annette knew the man's life story from their conversation the week before when the pool was full. She was forced to share a lane with him. Tonight, she headed to the opposite side from where Len splashed. Annette Packard had worked for the FBI for 25 years. Breaking in as a field agent, she quickly deduced that toting a gun and chasing bad guys was not her calling. After a year, she was transferred to surveillance, and 2 years later, she was tasked with doing preliminary research on a district attorney with political aspirations for the governor's mansion. It was on that task force that Annette, as a 34-year-old disillusioned FBI agent, had found her calling. Sometimes, she learned, talents were discovered without cultivating them, and goals reached without pursuing them, or even knowing they existed. Thrown onto a task force in her mid-30s, Annette Packard cultivated a knack for probing into people's personal affairs. Over the years, she proved damn good at it. Ruthless might better describe her ability to pry the lid off one's life and root for worrisome tidbits. For the past many years, when a prominent political figure went through the vetting process, it was Annette Packard who got the call to do the digging. The Bureau still required her to carry a firearm at all times, but instead of chasing bad guys, she sniffed out the secrets politicians tried to bury and hide. She tucked a few remaining strands of hair underneath her swimming cap and jumped into the pool. With her arms wrapped around her chest, she speared feet first to the bottom. The cold water was like an embrace from an old friend. Many complained about the pool's frigid temperature, but Annette preferred it on the icier side. The cool water prevented her from overheating and jolted her mind into a sharp state of concentration. She flexed her knees when her feet hit the bottom, then pushed upward, releasing air from her lungs until she broke the surface. Positioning herself against the wall, she took a deep breath and pushed hard off the crumbling tile, kicking underwater for half the length of the pool before starting into a freestyle stroke. After 3 laps, she found her rhythm and kept a steady pace for 30 minutes, barely noticing her increasing heart rate. This many decades in the water, it took a lot to gas her. She had to push herself. If she wanted a cardiovascular workout, which at times she did, mostly though, she preferred a slow and steady fat burn. It kept the weight off and her muscles toned. It also helped keep her thoughts organized, something her position inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation demanded. After 40 minutes, she decided to burn her remaining energy on a 100-meter sprint. She flipped at the wall and dug long strokes into the water, kicking what energy she had left into the wake behind her. As she approached the final turn, she felt a presence above the water. Someone was standing at the edge of the pool watching her. She aborted her flip halfway through her underwater turn and broke the surface, then peeled her goggles off and rested them on her forehead. "James," she said to her assistant, and the number 2 agent involved with the vetting of Lawrence Chadwick. "What's up?" "We've got a situation," James said. They were 3 months into the Chadwick vet and had hit no significant potholes, a comforting yet worrisome situation. Annette's occupation bred suspicion, not confidence, the longer she went without finding dirt on the subject she was vetting. Annette always found dirt, and when she didn't, it usually meant they were hiding it. "What kind of situation?" Annette asked in a heavy breath of exertion. "A bad one. We need you upstairs right away." "How bad?" Annette wiped the chlorine water from her eyes. "A course correction or engine failure?" Over the years, Annette's team had taken to describing problems that arose during their vets in terms of traveling the ocean on a cruise line. Course corrections were common and manageable. They meant something minor had come up, and they needed to pivot and regroup to get around it. An engine failure came up less frequently, but could usually be handled if caught early enough. I'd classify this more of an iceberg in our direct path.
Shit, Annette said, peeling her swim cap off her head. How big?
Titanic big. Chapter 28. Washington, D.C., Thursday, April 13th, 2023, 10:32 p.m. Laura McAllister sat alone in the small recording studio on the campus of McCormack University, pulled the headphones off her ears, and pushed the microphone away from her. Besides the glimmer of her laptop and the few lights glowing on the dashboard of the control panel, the studio was dark. She took a deep breath to calm her nerves now that she had finished the recording. But still her hands shook when she pulled the USB flash drive from her computer. The memory stick contained the final edits of the episode she had been working on for the past month. Now, with her voice over-completed and testimonials polished, the episode was nearly ready to drop. Last month, when she appeared on Wake Up America, Dante Campbell had asked her what she would be working on next. At the time, Laura had no idea. A month later, she believed she had a story that would send shock waves throughout the university. Stored on the flash stick was a wide-ranging episode that covered her month-long investigation into allegations of rape at McCormack University, and the blatant cover-up by faculty and administrators who hoped they could bury the story deep in the ground, where it would die and decay before anyone knew it existed. The episode was the most far-reaching and legitimate piece of investigative reporting she'd done. It contained interviews with students who knew the facts, faculty who were brave enough to talk, scientists who explained how date rape drugs work, and psychiatrists who clarified why rape victims don't always or immediately come forward to tell their stories. The episode named the offenders and confirmed the accusations with timelines and photos. Laura had even gone quasi-undercover to a fraternity party to prove that its members were spiking drinks with gamma-hydroxybutyrate, a date rape drug commonly referred to as liquid GO. Laura McAllister was about to prove again that small outlets like her little university radio show could break huge stories. Her exposé was poised to make a huge splash. It not only tackled campus rape at McCormack University, date rape drugs and university cover-ups, but also poignantly examined the debate about consent and dove deeply into the choices students make about sex. The episode was sure to have the university and those in charge scrambling. It had the power to ruin lives and end careers, which was why Laura was starting to have reservations about airing it. The story was so volatile that Laura worried about the fallout it would cause. She'd done her homework, confirmed every accusation, and collected proof of each bombshell she would drop. Yet some part of her psyche questioned whether she should go through with it. For one of the accused in particular, things would go haywire in a way Laura knew she could not predict. She imagined having to testify in front of Congress about the legitimacy of her findings, and she worried about the powerful people who would do anything to thwart the story and discredit her as nothing more than a college kid with dreams of being the next Jodi Kantor, Megan Twohey, or Ronan Farrow. She wondered whether the scrutiny would be worth it. Then she thought of the victims, the girls whose stories she would tell had already had their lives ruined, and somehow Laura had become their voice. Laura had become the only one who would shine light on their tragedy because the people in charge wanted the story to go away. Laura and her little radio show had become the only avenue to get their stories out, and she felt obligated to use her platform to help. If the lives of those who perpetrated the crimes and then tried to cover them up were destroyed in the process, so be it. And if powerful people came after her and tried to smear her reputation, she would push back. She had Dante Campbell's information stored on her phone and an offer from one of the most powerful and well-known journalists in the country to help if Laura ever needed advice. Her cell phone buzzed and pulled Laura from her thoughts. When she looked at the caller ID, she saw Duncan Chadwick's name. His father had been all over the news lately as the president's likely nominee to fill the Supreme Court vacancy. As Laura stared at her phone, two things dawned on her. The first was that, despite her efforts at secrecy, her story had leaked. The second was that she was now in a race against time. Chapter 29. Washington, D.C., Friday, April 14, 2023, 6:45 p.m. Annette Packard sat in the back of the SUV and read through her notes. During her career, she'd overseen the vetting of dozens of judges, scores of senators, and countless congressional candidates. Nearly a third of America's sitting governors had had their lives picked apart by Annette Packard before starting their campaigns and making their runs. Smooth sailing was never expected when rooting through the private affairs of political hopefuls. Yet, until recently, Annette had found exactly that in the last 3 months of picking through Larry Chadwick's life. Clear skies and calm winds. The man was a choir boy. It had been a refreshing change. But now the other shoe had dropped. It usually did. This time it was Chadwick's son who threatened to derail the process. As the SUV pulled up to the Chadwick residence, Annette contemplated that, up until this latest development, the worst she'd found during her forensic review of the judge's life and career were a couple of favors called in to get his delinquent son out of trouble. They were nothing most parents wouldn't have done if they had the power and influence to do it. At least, that was how she and her team had presented the information to the president. There was no denying that Larry Chadwick could be accused of abusing his position to bail his son out of trouble. But, in the grand scheme of things, the transgressions were minor. The biggest had been Larry skirting his son around a DUI charge when Duncan Chadwick was 17. Sketchy, but not bad enough to sink Larry's nomination. At most, the incident would lead to a few uncomfortable questions and accusations of privilege from particularly nasty senators out for blood, and this would happen only if the events were discovered. The DUI, in particular, had been so well concealed that Annette and her team had barely managed to uncover it, and she had the power of the entire Justice Department behind her. In the event that an eager senator was able to unearth the DUI and other minor incidents, Larry could handle the questions. They would coach him on how to respond. Going after a nominee's kid was dangerous. If the tactic got classified as a cheap assault on the candidate's child, it would backfire. Bottom line, attacking Larry Chadwick for his son's non-violent offenses would be an unwise approach by the opposition. Going after Larry Chadwick for his son's role in a series of rapes on McCormack University's campus, however, would not only be fair game, but lethal to Larry's chances. When the driver pulled to the curb, Annette climbed out of the SUV and headed toward the Chadwick's brownstone. Dark thunderstorms were forming on the horizon, threatening to ruin months of blue skies and clear sailing. Chapter 30. Washington, D.C., Friday, April 14, 2023, 7:00 p.m. The FBI's presence in his chambers no longer surprised him. It was when they showed up unannounced at his home that Larry Chadwick became uncomfortable. Annette Packard and her team had taken a wrecking ball to his past, knocking down everything that was questionable and picking through the rubble for suspicious or nefarious remains. He resigned himself to the fact that in order to be handed a lifetime appointment on the highest court in the country, his life was going to be dismantled ahead of time to make sure there was nothing rotting behind the walls. The demolition, however, never seemed to end. As Larry pulled up to his DC brownstone, he saw the black government-issued SUV parked out front, hazards blinking, and an agent behind the wheel. House calls always meant a development had come up, on which Annette needed Larry's immediate attention. They were nearing the end of the vetting period. Larry had been through his life's history with Annette on a number of occasions, and could think of nothing more he could offer about himself. In recent weeks, Annette had moved away from his academic years, and had started concentrating on his adult life and career. But his finances were in order with no blemishes of bribes or corruption. Larry was confident in his professional choices throughout his career. He had offered the right opinions and decisions from the bench. and they were all grounded in logical legal analysis. His hires and appointees had been diverse and without controversy. Everything to this point had been deemed squeaky clean, so he wondered what new development had brought the FBI to his home at 7 in the evening. Larry pushed through his front door, hung his coat in the closet, and walked into the kitchen to find Annette Packard sitting at the table across from his wife. "Annette," Larry said, "I didn't expect to see you tonight." "Sorry to barge in unannounced," Annette said. "Something's come up." She wore dark slacks and a blazer and looked professional as always. The woman was the very definition of no nonsense. Larry walked over and gave his wife a kiss. "Hey, babe, everything okay?" "Yes," Renee Chadwick said. "Annette and I were just catching up until you got home. She has something she needs to discuss with both of us." "Okay," Larry said in a casual tone. "I'm having a drink. Can I get you something?" "No," Annette said. "I'm fine, thank you." "Glass of wine?" Larry asked his wife. "Maybe in a moment. I'm anxious to hear what Annette has to tell us." Larry walked to the kitchen bar and scooped ice into a glass tumbler. "What's so urgent? This couldn't wait until morning?" "I'm afraid not," Annette said. "We have a problem, Larry." There was a soft pain somewhere in his gut, fear that perhaps one of his affairs had been uncovered. "What now?" "My taxes are clean." "Didn't you just finish with them?" "Yes, taxes are fine. I'm afraid this has to do with your son." "Duncan?" Larry turned from the bar, holding his scotch. "It was a DUI, Annette, and the blood work was equivocal. They dismissed it more out of a lack of evidence than any influence I was able to apply." "It's not the DUI." Larry saw that Annette's expression was straight-faced and stoic. "What is it?" Larry asked. "Have you ever heard of a McCormack University radio program called The Scoop?" Larry sat down next to Renee. "No." "Should I?" "It's produced by a student named Laura McAllister. The show is broadcast from the School of Journalism's recording studio on campus and is quite popular. It sounds like the whole university tunes in to listen each week. The girl has gained national notoriety for scooping breaking stories, and was recently featured on Wake Up America with Dante Campbell." "Okay," Larry said. "What started out as a little university program has turned into a pop culture sensation. Laura McAllister is being dubbed the female version of Joe Rogan. Ian's a popular podcaster who appeals to a young audience." "I know who he is." For a senior in college, Laura McAllister has been able to attract legitimate A-list guests on her show, and no topic is off limits. Through social media, more than 1 million people, mostly college students across the country, listen to her show each week when she uploads the episodes to her social accounts. Her show's growing exponentially. "Okay," Larry said again. "And this affects me how?" Annette folded her hands and placed them on the table. "We have sources telling us that this student journalist is looking into allegations of rape on McCormack University's campus and is preparing to air a show spilling all the details." Larry exhaled an exhausted breath. "Do I want to ask?" "Probably not, but you need to know. Laura McAllister is preparing to make allegations against the Delta Chi fraternity, your son's fraternity, claiming that members were involved with spiking drinks at fraternity-run parties with the drug gamma-hydroxybutyrate, referred to as liquid GA. It's a tasteless, odorless drug commonly used as a date rape chemical. There are accusations from a number of girls, but one of them, a girl named Christy Penny, claims she was raped earlier in the semester at the Delta Chi fraternity and has filed a formal police report." "For Christ's sake," Larry said. He took a large gulp of scotch. "Why haven't I heard anything about this from the school?" "They're investigating it internally, from what my sources tell me. You haven't heard about it because the university is desperate to keep a lid on the crisis. McCormack has a significant endowment and strong financial support from alumni. The university is positioned nicely as an elite academic institution that rivals the Ivy Leagues. A rape scandal would be bad for business, devastating to the university's image, and would close the spigot of alumni donations. It would put the president of the university and the dean in a difficult situation, one from which it's unlikely either would survive. Not to mention that a rape scandal would hinder recruitment. These cases of sexual assault have been ongoing for some time, my sources tell me. The university has been working hard to keep the stories quiet, but now that the latest victim has filed a formal police report, keeping a lid on things for much longer won't be possible. And if Laura McAllister airs her show, depending on what exactly she has uncovered, the scandal will be all over the news. Is Duncan involved? Renee asked. That's what we need to find out. But even if Duncan wasn't involved, it might not matter as far as your nomination is concerned. The scandal alone might be enough to tank you. God damn it, Larry said. Before we overreact, Annette said, we need to talk to Duncan. Everything we've heard so far is second-sourced. We may be able to get out in front of this if we know the specifics. If Duncan can provide us with insider details. If he wasn't involved, then we can make a statement before the story drops that will hopefully diffuse things. What kind of statement? Larry asked. You, Renee, and Duncan make a public statement via press conference, denouncing any wrongdoing by the fraternity and speaking out definitively against sexual assault. You make a strong statement about consent. Of course, Duncan will have to speak as well, and will have to distance himself from the fraternity. You don't have any daughters, so that's going to work against you because you won't be able to mention how empathetic you are to the victims. People will call you out on it if you try. Anyway, there's an avenue. Around this, it's narrow, treacherous, and needs to be navigated very carefully. But it exists. The first thing we need to do is talk with Duncan. Larry nodded. He finished his scotch in one giant gulp. What did you say this girl's name was? The student journalist? Laura McAllister. Why do you know her? Larry shook his head. No, just trying to get my brain around this thing.